Good morning, dear guests, dear colleagues. We are happy to welcome you on our today webinar. Most of you are aware that one of the main priorities of Actuarial Association of Europe is to monitor adequacy and sustainability of pensions. And with that regard, Pension Committee recognize one of the main role of actuaries to protect the financial stability and financial interest of the customers. Having in mind that only few countries in Europe has their national pension tracking system, IOPA published advice to promote benefits from having such type of platforms. And that's why we are focusing our webinar today on the challenges ahead pension tracking services. And we are happy to have a number of presenters which will share the different angles of opinion regarding these services. Before starting, I would like to make some technical notes with regard to our logistic today. Because of the big number of participants, all of you will be muted, and we are kindly ask you to provide any questions that you may have during the presentation using the chat. Me and my colleague Jeroen van den Bosch will moderate the Q&A session, and we will read out the questions after presentation. If you need to share more detailed opinion or you want to speak at the end of today's session, you can raise hand and you will be allowed to unmute yourself. First, we will start with one conclusions made by IOPA based on advice. I'm very happy that Jan Berntsen, who chaired the task force of IOPA on pension tracking system, accepted our invitation to be our first lecturer today. Jan, the floor is yours, and thanks for being with us.
Good morning, everyone. Can you understand me? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah,
Fantastic.
perfect.
As always, check, double check. It's amazing that technology provides us this platform to be together across Europe in one room. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the AAE for spending attention to this subject. Today, I will speak from my role I had last year. I had the privilege of chairing a task force of supervisors from both the European supervisor, IOPA, as from several member states, NCAs. In daily life, as a short introduction, I am head of supervision at the Authority of Financial Markets. For those who don't know, in Holland, in the Netherlands, where I live and where I work, we have a so-called Twin Peaks supervision model. It's already 20 years old. It's a celebration year this year. And what it means is that on the financial supervision, on the financial sector, we have a split. The legislator made a split between prudential supervision, which is in the hands of the central bank, the Nederlandse Bank. And on the one hand, and that's the one peak, and the second peak is conduct supervision, which is concentrated at the AFM. I work now already 3 years at the AFM. I am responsible for, amongst others, pension and insurance supervision. And previous to that, I worked over 25 years at the Central Bank of the Netherlands and also at the ECB. So for me, this exercise brings together personal experiences. In the past, I have been working on, for example, the Financial Assessment Framework, FTK in the Netherlands, but also working together in a European context, which I did a lot at the ECB and DNB. Today I speak in my part-time role as the chair of this task force, which well, it's actually over. We did our job. And today my presentation, I have some slides I will share now, will be focused on a couple of things. Let me try to share it. I hope you can see it on the screen now. Can you see it? Can someone put a thumbs up? Yeah. Okay. Well, what you see here is on the right-hand corner is actually some promotion for Holland, but no, it's just kidding. This is the most simple form, but perhaps of a PTS, something in your hand, where you, namely a mobile phone. Everyone is connected nowadays to an app or its phone, or via a QR code. You can simply see what is your pension at retirement date and at what age you retire. This is the most simple, keep it simple example, and actually it works. It's a fancy new derivative of the Dutch PTS. And just to make it concrete, what are we talking about? It's about an ordinary, average citizen in the European Union who wants to know, what is my pension, my future income at retirement age, how much is it, and at what age? This seems so simple, but it isn't. And in the coming 40 minutes, I will share with you some thoughts about that. I have 3 building blocks in my presentation. First, I want to set the scene, and then the majority of the time I will spend on the technical advice this task force provided to the European Commission in December, according to 4 building blocks. Those are the 4 blocks areas also of our attention in our technical advice. And then I will would like to share with you some questions I have to you as a group of professionals, actuaries, where perhaps what your role in this in this topic could be. First of all, I start with setting the scene. What is a pension tracking service? And that's such a long word that I use PTS. It's not a disease. It's not something where you can be ill of, but PTS is so simpler than every time say pension tracking system. What we're talking about today is a national pension tracking system, not a pan-European system for cross-border citizens or so. No, this is about an average citizen in a member state, for example, Denmark, for example, France, who wants to have access and then have an overview of its pension entitlements. That's what we're talking about. In most of the cases, it's online, because everything is digital nowadays, you could say. Both how it is registered, administrated, but also how we work. I don't know how it is in your country, but in my country, I hardly get any physical post by the postman every day. Most of the things I get via email or via app. So that's about the talking today. What is this technical advice about? It's about developing good practices for setting up a national pension tracking system. And what we want to do is that with this advice is our aim was to provide a technical, practical tool for member states who wish to establish their own national pension tracking system. I will tell you in a minute a bit more about the background, why we did this and why EIOPA did this, because I can imagine you have some questions about that. First of all, for who? I already emphasized it's for European citizens. That's in the end where it's all about. It's to allow citizens, ordinary people, you and me, who have a normal daily job, to obtain an overview of all their pension entitlements in one place, in an accessible and understandable way. This seems so logical if you write it down like I did in this presentation, but it isn't. We all probably know from our profession that already per member state, it can differ a lot, the various pension sources. And if you look at it across member states, well, the beauty of, I would say, on a personal note, the beauty of Europe is its diversity. But if you want, if you have a look at it at the moment, how the pension landscape is very different. You can say there's a first pillar, which most countries have, a second pillar, a third pillar. Could you also imagine fourth or fifth pillar or other assets which in future could be helpful to for your could be seen as a pension entitlement for future income when you retire. But we concentrate here on, in principle, the first, the second, and the third pillar. Why does it matter for you citizens? Well, it helps them to understand what income they can expect and give them certainty about it, and raise also awareness on whether this is efficient or that they have to take actions. So call for actions. It can help them to engage and also increase the knowledge of their pension situation. I don't know how it is in your country. In our country, in my country, the Netherlands, I'm speaking not as a EIOPA chair, but as a Dutchman. Well, we see that in our country, decades ago, almost 50 or 70 years ago, we started with a capital funded system. That has helped us to save a lot. But if you look at the ordinary citizen, what is his consciousness and his knowledge about pension? If we do all type of consumer testing, both academics or as a supervisor, we see that it's very limited. People attach pensions something when you're old, and when you're old, perhaps you die, or of the setup of the system. It's something your employer fixed, or your labor union is also involved. So it's something which is probably very good organized and a kind of a soft paternalistic approach. This is not to be, this is just some circumstantial anecdotal comments by my side, but it's just to give. So even if you have, like in the case of Holland, a second pillar, which is well funded, it doesn't mean automatically that the citizens where you're doing it for have knowledge or are engaged. So a pension tracking system is not a silver bullet, but can help. It's not the only thing, but it's a part of a strategy, and it helps to enable citizens to increase their knowledge of their pension situation, and also preferably, where I would say, at an age which is not too late. If you start thinking of your pension and income, future pension income, in the second half of your career or much later, when you're 60 or 70, then you're definitely too late. So it's also important, also looking at wealth accumulation, that you start early about thinking of your financial planning and also about your future income. What we also see in Europe, and now I go to the next slide, is a couple of developments. And just to give you some context, I will highlight two. First, we see that in some countries, most countries, we had a history or background of defined benefit systems, and more these are becoming hybrid, collective DC and to DC for all kinds of reasons. That's on the left-hand side. And of course, we all know that is the population, the pyramid, or the setting up of the population is quite changing as well. These are, it's perhaps going slowly, but if you look over time, and your profession does it, know it better by profession, I would guess, than other, is that, for example, how much people of the working age fund, for example, in the pay-as-you-go system, the people who are retired, well, those ratios are changing quite dramatically and can differ per country quite a lot. So today I will not talk about what is the ideal pension landscape and the setup of a first pillar, second pillar, pay-as-you-go, and capital funded. That's not a topic about today. That's much more also a political choice, but that's also something which is should be highlighted and related to. Today we'll talk about the PTS. So perhaps also good in setting the scene from how much PTS are there nowadays. Well, this map of Europe on the right-hand side gives you a flavor very quickly. It's quite limited, as you can see. If we look at how many countries have a PTS in place, And there are differences as well, and I will not highlight all the differences, but there are differences. Some countries, they have a second, a third pillar in it, some only the second pillar in it, like in my country. But it's limited. It's the orange colored countries that's which have in place, and the yellow colored, and I believe also a couple of them will be presenting both today, so both orange and yellow today in today's presentation, are very busy in developing the PTS, and this also applies to the UK and Switzerland. And you can see that there's room for perhaps for some more member states to offer such an overview of pension entitlements to their citizens. And I believe that's also one of the reasons why the European Commission highlighted is that this tool can be helpful if member states are thinking of designing or reshaping their pension system. Well, then I come to why this technical advice on PTS. I already said the European Commission requested a call for advice to EIOPA, actually on various pension tools. I think it was part of their Capital Markets Union Action Plan, which you probably know. One of the actions is support people in their retirement, and the call for advice was to EIOPA was actually on two things: more on the macro level, on national pension dashboards, so assess the adequacy and sustainability of overall retirement income in a given member state. That's a separate task force which also produced a paper and a technical advice. Today, I will highlight more about the second call for advice, or the second part of the call advice, which was if a member state wants to set up a national PTS, how to do it, and especially to leverage from current practices and how to facilitate an individual's average citizens and a clear understanding of their estimated financial position. And the intention was not to provide recommendations on the political choice or the public choice, whether at national EU level, but to provide impartial advice and good practice on the technical matters, simply, as I said, for member states who want to implement the PTS. And why? Well, I highlight this because I can imagine there are all kinds of questions of it, but we see also that each member state has its own legal framework for its pension system. Is something which is definitely not very much organized at the national level. And every member state is also very responsible for political choices related to the implementation of a PTS. You can imagine all kinds of trade-offs between functionality and cost, or the best form of governance. So in our advice, and I will go into it in a minute, we highlight all the technical and practical manners. Our intention was not to come with a political advice at all, or so on how this should be done or be standardized. So we identified a set of principles and good practices as examples. We draw them from experiences with PTS that are currently in use or under development. Not only the experiences from these countries I put in this graph, but we also spoke to and we learned lessons from outside Europe. Think of Israel, think of Iceland, think of Australia. I think personally that was very useful. Now, what did we deliver? I am now on slide 9. We worked with a small group as a task force, a small group of supervisors from a very mixed background from both member states with or without PTS or developing a PTS. And we worked in very close cooperation with practitioners and academics from both inside the European Union. We also, which is very traditional, and we had a consultation phase during the summer and also kind of stakeholder events. And already from this side, I want to thank your profession group for your support and also your feedback. So a big thank you in advance. So what did we deliver? Today I will highlight the first check, the technical report. That's the main report, a set of group principles and recommendations. To facilitate, to help also, we provided an overview of the roadmap, because it's not that easy. The history learns to set up PTS. You really need to start small, but have but think big. You really need a step-by-step approach and long-term commitment, a plan. And third, I will highlight a little bit, but I also want to bring under your attention. We published as a side document also a research report on consumer testing that's very much focused on the front end, so the engagement of the PTS, the landing page with the citizen, and to not only think what an average citizen would need, but also to really test, fact check. We did that together with with new techniques, where we, for example, like eye tracking to see which type of pages work and don't work less, and so on. So if you have some time and you're interested, then it's also a very nice cutting edge behavioral research. I would say have a look at that. That's the reason why I put it on the slide. Well, let me go then to the second part of the presentation. Just checking my time. Yep. The overview of the technical advice and also of my presentation is following the 4 areas of our report. The first area is about scope, and the aim and objective of a PTS. It seems so simple, but we already found out that what is a pension? It seems so simple, but it's hard to answer. So I think that that's good to highlight a couple of things of that. I will do that in a minute. The second area is about the front end. So how is the communication engaging for the people who you design it for it, so the average European citizen for the national member state. Third, it's about perhaps not sexy, but probably the most challenging is the whole backend. How do you organize it with all its aspects, like the data, the standard settings, the calculations, the IT standards, and so on and so forth. And last but not least, it's also about the governance. How do you set it up? How do you organize it? There are various stakeholders involved, public and private, and there are different kinds of models in the current PTSs in place. And what can we learn from that, and what are some recommendations based on that? So in the coming minutes, I will go all of these areas a bit more into depth. Just to give you some flavor, and for if you're really interested, I would say have a look at the technical advice, which is on the AOPA website, and where I included also the links in this presentation. Let me start with scope. If I talk about scope, there actually are 4 blocks. What is the goal? Well, the goal is to have a view of the accrued entitlements and projected retirement income in one place. Again, this seems so simple, and probably from your profession, you know that if I say projected retirement income, well, you can imagine that there are a lot of questions behind it. And also in a very simple and meaningful manner. So not so that someone can easily digest it, and if they want to know more, can find it. Secondly, is about scope. The ambition was all pension sources, including statutory and supplementary pensions. We saw that that's already a challenge. So you can imagine that, for example, as I said in my introduction, people also save for their retirement in houses or other types of assets. That's very difficult so for a private person, individual person, that can mean a lot for his or her retirement. But if you set up and are thinking of designing a national PTS, yeah, this is a very big challenge. It's already a challenge to have in scope the first, the second, and the third pillar. Third, it's about the role. It's about raising awareness of users to seek further information or help. So it's not the silver bullet, but it's also not financial advice, but it should be part of I would say, a game plan to engage financial literacy, to engage citizens about taking also responsibility of their life, and to enable them and not to scare them. And also to do it with realistic ambitions and really realistic messages. And last but not least, yeah, who is it? Well, we call it the average citizen in a member state. So and that can already differ a lot. So and you can imagine that it matters a lot if you are a citizen from member state A or member state B. But we try to aggregate the best, the good practices from many countries. So one of the things about scope I want to highlight is that to be useful for pension communication, we thought that statutory pension should be included, although that's much more often in the public domain, but often in most, what we see in most member states, that's a very important part of the future retirement income. But at the end, it's ultimately a policy choice of the member states. So that's to give you a bit of flavor of the type of recommendations, technical recommendations we did. And second recommendation about pension plans and products, we said, well, there is already a EIOPA database for pension plans and products. Use that as a starting point, not to invent the wheel again. And also about aggregating, it should be in a meaningful way, so the citizens could really use it. What we saw also in some member states, and that's I would say one of the advantages, perhaps Christopher in this presentation will highlight on it, because I found that example in Denmark, is that the PTS can also helpful to facilitate citizens in financial decision making. For example, if they are applying for a mortgage or negotiating a mortgage, that they can use this type of information when they are seeking for an advice and making a good planning, and also including a retirement planning. I go further to the second block. The second area is about, yes, that's about the front end. The front end is, so to say, it should be designed considering the user behavior and cognitive biases, so how does an average citizen look at it? It's not a scholar, it's not an academic often, but it should be, and how does he or she thinks? So the work of the famous Daniel Kahneman, just included it here, can be helpful. We know, thanks to Kahneman and others, that the way how we think and take decisions matters a lot, and can be simply said according to two types of systems. In most of the cases, we do it fast and unconscious and on a type of automatic pilot. Real thinking and rational thinking and calculating and logical thinking, yeah, this is not in most of the cases. It's roughly about 5% of the cases. So if you know this type of things, how people look, how people assess information, how to take decisions, please take also into account these kind of behavioral aspects when you design for example, a landscape. How do you present the information landscape for a citizen? Information should also be, we think, simple, but not simple does not mean that you don't provide information for those citizens who want to know more. A good example, and just to give you an example, is layering of information for those citizens who want to know more, that they can click further and find, for example, the more detailed information about the calculation of a projection, to give you an example of the sources, for example, would be another example in the second or third layer. Experience learns that perhaps the majority stays at the first layer, let's say 70 or 80%, but also there's a decent proportions, let's say 30%, that really wants to know more, or at the later stage wants to know more. And for another example could be click buttons to have more access to sources when you, for example, a citizen wants to have more financial information for planning, and this can help streamlining the quantity of information. Also on the user journey, the PTS information should be easily downloadable. That's a good example we saw in some member states, so users can really do something with it. And another recommendation on the user journey is that the member states should ensure that the neutrality of a PTS, a good design of the user journey, which is also user tested. And yeah, for the sake of time, I continue to the next page, if the system works. Yeah. Because I already said in my introduction, we also did some consumer testing about the landing page, and I will have one slide, this slide, which tries to summarize a couple of things we did. We present here a projected retirement income as an aggregate figure. On a net monthly basis, net monthly income in today's prices, and also taking into account the payout options available in the different member states to the citizens. We tested several of these mock-ups, so to say, and yeah, this was to tell you directly the conclusion. This was the most, yeah, by most citizens we tested. It was a decent group, significant group. This contained the most basic and most essential information for all users, which is also understood by them, regardless of their financial literacy knowledge. And this could be, for example, an example of layer 1 information. Information on total savings is very important, but that's something which you could be provided in a second layer with a clear signposting. And if you think about more advanced PTSs, what do they offer and could look like? Well, they could, for example, consider developing all kinds of scenarios. For example, a scenario: if I stop working now, how much would I get? What would be my retirement income? These are kind of examples you would see in the more advanced PTSs, or the thinking of more current advanced PTSs. I continue to the third building block. It's perhaps not that sexy, but it's about the back end. And we're here, I have a couple of messages. We see that various current PTSs for several individual member states have different starting points. Also about the design, and also about kind of data exchange model. Roughly said, you see two types of models. You see central databases, which have their pros and cons, and you see live access models. We had a lot of discussion internally about is it very clear? Is there a very clear preference or not? We try to balance on the basis of the pros and cons we identified, and also given that some of these PTSs which are in place now have a long background. They are already for 10 or 15 years or more in place, and as we all know, life has changed a lot on the IT side, on cybersecurity side, on data privacy, data protection side. So If I would say, if you start now, and that's why we wrote this technical advice, if you would start now, if you're considering as a national member state to start and set up a PTS, which really takes a long time, net live exit model, I would say would be the preferred data exchange model. Especially because there are some pros like increased data protection. But again, it should be technically feasible. You see in a lot of countries that are all kind of legacy systems where they are built on or should be built on. So that can be a hurdle. Yeah, and I believe another big lesson we saw, and I think it makes sense, but I really want to highlight, is not only make a good plan, but also pilot it. Some of the countries which I showed you in the beginning, which are in the yellow phase, so they are setting up. I think Germany is, for example, a good example that is really testing it, because if you really deep dive, and you probably know it much better from your profession than I do, the devil's in the details. It's very there are a lot of things to take into account if you really want to make an aggregate PTS. There are a lot of issues to take into account. The data also provided to the PTS should be also consistent. Should be, for example, consistent with the data provided in the pension benefits statement or annual information to consumers. That's you would say required by law. So that's also why I do highlight is not only a legal requirement, it's also, it gives you some in flavor of how challenging it is, but also necessary to have a common set of standards. And this also applies for other aspects, like if you otherwise if your apples, you're comparing apples with oranges, and you want to compare Granny Smith and Elstars to name two apples, to compare apples to apples as much as possible. This is, I would guess, for your profession, one of the most important parts of the technical advice, I would say. There's a lot to say more, but I hope that my following presenters also spend some time, or in the Q&A there will be some time for it, because there's a whole world behind the back end, which is also important. For the sake of time, I continue to my to the last building block, the last area, which is about governance. We see that on governance, the public good attributes of a PTS, of current PTS, are very valuable, are very should be considered to take into account when you set up a PTS. Often for the citizens, it's free of charge, it's independent, it's credible and transparent. Although, for example, in some countries you see also that commercial parties take the lead in the PTS. It's not a commercial-driven project, so to say. It's not a marketing tool. I think these public good attributes are very valuable and also needed for credibility and the trust of the citizens in such a PTS. It makes also sense to have one PTS and not a variety of them, because, for example, citizens build up during their life at various places, various employers' pension, and therefore pension information they need to aggregate. Secondly, on governance, we see at the moment in various member states different setups. So both a public body or public-private partnership with the inclusion and the consultation of various stakeholders. It's hard to say, so we didn't, if there is one preferred model. What we did say is that the funding, for example, is important to have also clear expectations and make clear commitments about that. There are various ways to do it, or like a type of income tax or industry level, or a combination of both. And last but not least, I already said it, start small and think big. Oh, that's about the rollout and the scale of a PTS. Do it with the end in mind, but also in proportional step by step. And here you see also a link to the roadmap where we try to condense the knowledge of various member states, also from countries outside Europe, which have or still busy with the PTS, to learn from those lessons. For example, to give you a personal note, I learned a lot from the practitioners from the UK, where given their background, given the setup of their country, they're still struggling and warned us for a couple of issues they faced with and are still facing with. To give you a little bit of background, that's that type of comment, that of kind of good advice, we also included in this document for because there are a lot of countries, as I showed, which are really setting up a new PTS. So yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of this technical advice is learn from each other, learn from the industry practices, learn from national practices. I'm coming to an end because I also want to give you some room for questions and answers, because I believe we have some 10 minutes left. What's in for you? I was thinking you're a profession which has great knowledge on the technical side, on how it really works, has knowledge, especially also in this European association, about the differences between member states. And just to challenge you to kick off your webinar, I thought, well, what are, let's say, 2 challenges where you this is not limitative, but where your profession could play a role. I already said backend is so important, and that consists so many things where this introduction has it's too limited. But think about data integrity, think about data quality, think about data governance. These are all kind of things where your profession. Well, I'm not an actuarian, but I have a lot of professional friends and also real friends which are actuaries. So I think I have a little bit of inside knowledge who you are. But yeah, I would say it's part of your job. You're used to these kind of challenges, whether you work at an insurance company, whether you work in a public entity, or so on and so forth. So I would say this is definitely the nitty-gritty, pain in the ass details, where if you look to countries which were so open to tell where they really face problems, it's often on these kind of things. And that also applies to this second challenge. It sounds so easy to write uniform calculations, but in the end, if you really want to aggregate into a simple number the retirement income, yeah, you need some standardification or uniform calculations about the methods you use, the parameters you use. I wrote it down as a question. So should there be some guidance? Should it be something done by the industry or with some public hand or together with the profession? Question mark. There are some examples in Europe where it's done by the industry itself. In some other countries, it's a mix, like in my country. I don't want to emphasize if there is a best example, but it is really needed. If you don't do these kind of things, that's something what we learned also from countries which are still struggling to set up the PTS is about this type of things. If you don't make these kind of second group of uniform you need to make arrangements on these kind of, for example, set of calculation parameters. Otherwise, it's a hell of a job to do it. I hand over back to the organizers because I believe Jeroen and Tatjana, you are the moderators who also aggregate questions, because due to this screen chatting, I cannot see what the questions are. So
exactly, yeah. Thank you very much, Jan. My name is Jeroen van der Bos. I'm co-hosting this meeting together with Tatjana Bitunska. Jan, you've got certainly good questions on this slide, and I really know that Christopher and Richard will get into those items as well. I've seen one question from the public, but first of all, I would like to ask you one or two other questions, and then I'll go to the question that Jos Berkemeyer has asked. One of the questions I had in the beginning, you talked about the amount of countries that have a PTS. Do you know why there are only, between brackets, 11 countries that have a pension tracking system in Europe? Did you find out what the reason behind that was?
To be in this, I believe you can see this again, the map of Europe. Yes. I didn't do a historical analysis. No, if you can see to the color of the countries, especially the orange ones, you can see that typically countries which have a capital funded second or third pillar and or second or third pillar in their pension landscape. So I believe that could be an example. So if I can talk, for example, for my country, in the Netherlands, that already started 50 or 70 years ago to set it up. So it really made sense. And it's definitely not something which started with a clean sheet and the next day it was there. It was really an initiative from the sector and the public, and it went hand in hand in very step by step. I believe that's also applicable to other countries which have a very large second pillar and perhaps a third pillar system. I see some countries in yellow, especially the large countries, France and Germany, which are moving towards building up a second pillar more and more. So I guess, but perhaps other speakers can tell it better, but I guess that's one of the reasons to, if the importance of, the relative importance of the second pillar increases over time, you want a statement from the first pillar is not enough. You need to inform the citizen also with what he is accumulating in the second and third pillar. That's my simple answer, Jeroen.
Yep. Thank you very much, Jan. One other question is about the choice that you as a project group have made on looking at the pension tracking services in certain countries, but not at cross-border pension tracking systems. It was on one of your slides, I think, of the 4 areas that you're going through, or we're going through. It stated there that there were you didn't look in your advice at cross-border citizens. Why wasn't that in scope? And maybe is that something that would be interesting for the future?
It was so it's a gray answer, so it's not a black and white answer what I will give. So we spend some attention to it because there is an initiative, the ETS called, probably you know, for intra-EU mobile citizens. I don't know, it's about 8 million of the 450 million we have in Europe, so it's a decent group. So it's not a small group, but the focus really was also on this advice. As I started, if a member state, given that pension is still very much a national issue, a national choice, a national political decision, national laws, and so on and so forth. If a member state, and given also this picture that most member states are currently not offering such an overview to their citizens, the focus was very much, if you are a member state and you are thinking of setting up PTS, what do you need? What could you learn from current practices inside and also outside Europe? Where do I make choices about what is this?
About scoping.
It's about scope.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the final question I want to ask you is the question that Jos Berkemeyer has asked. Could you tell something about GDPR issues within pension tracking systems? For example, how can you ensure that people who are looking at their numbers, their pension numbers, to make sure that those people really are the only ones who look at those numbers, and that there's enough security on the line to make sure that this information is not shared with other people or organizations. Did you look at that aspect within the advice that you've made?
Yes, the simple answer is yes. We looked at it, but not as a GDPR data protection full scope exercise. So we highlighted it, given that I had limited time because it's a report of over 130 pages. So I had to make some choices, but I would say, and that's an easy answer, but it's the most honest answer, have a look at the technical advice on it. We try to give it a place in the area of the backend. So that was also one of my purposes, to raise your interest further, and to, if you haven't done it, to read the document, to give you kind of an introduction to the document. And especially in the backend document, I can imagine if I wouldn't be an actuarian, that the backend consists of various themes which have definitely your interest, and that definitely is one on data integrity and data protection. And roughly said, that's also why I give this more personal recommendation. If a member state would start now with such a PTS, and this is definitely something which for the long run, you have to, as I said, start small but think big. And it should also be there for a couple of years. Yeah, given the importance of data protection and data privacy, and that we see in that current PTS is roughly a centralized database model versus a live access model. That there are a lot of in-betweens, but those are the two main flavors. I would say net, considering all pros and cons of each model, I would say, well, live access has some more pros on this aspect, this theme of data protection, than the central database. Again, I'm not an IT expert, but I know enough from them, what they told me, that both have their pros and cons, and live access also definitely has the disadvantages, but as about data protection, it definitely could help to reduce all kinds of problems of hacking, of cyber risk, and so on and so forth. Those themes, those risks, as we know, are not fake. They happen. Actually, they happen nowadays also between states. So it's there, and I think, and we think that a PTS should be credible, should be something trustful. That's also why I emphasize, and also in this presentation, the public good attributes. Although it's perhaps not a public good as we see in some current member state, because perhaps Christopher can tell something more, but how it looks and feels like, it has a lot of good public good attributes, it's something you should trust. Like, I don't know, for example, you should trust the quality of the water coming from your sink in your kitchen or from your bathroom. That type of public good attribute, I also encourage member states that they obtain when they set up a PTS.
Well, thank you very much, Jan, for your introduction on this theme and on the work that you've done. I think there's a very interesting report now available on the website of IOPA. I think it will be distributed via the AAE. But in any case, you can find it very easily by Googling on pension tracking system and IOPA, and then you will find the report. So I would like to make the link to the presentation of Christopher Borg. Christopher Borg is from Denmark, so he could ask, at least answer some questions that Jan already stated. And as far as I know, Denmark has a system that works merely the same as in the Netherlands with a live access model. So maybe he would get into that part as well. So Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see my screen. Somebody's nodding.
Yes,
Fine.
yes, we do. Yeah.
Thank you very much, John. I think it was a very interesting presentation, and many of your points and many of your warnings of difficult aspects, I can confirm that they are very close to our experience in Denmark. Quite briefly, my name is Christopher Borg. I've been working in the Danish life insurance sector for more than 20 years before I joined consulting almost 10 years ago. And I was actually participating in what I will come back to as the second round of developing the Danish pension tracker system. So I've been involved. For a brief time, I was a board member of the organization, and I've followed it ever since, because I think it's a very, very interesting and very valuable tool to have for in a country. Let me see if I can make it swap. Yep, here we go. So just a brief background on the Danish pension system in order to set the frame and the scope of a national pension tracker system called Pension Info. I'll give a detailed or small story about how it started and the struggle of getting the system up and running before I just briefly touch upon the organization behind it, what it looks like, what information it contains. And at the very end, I have some numbers and figures of how much it's used. I mean, if people don't use it, it really isn't worth much. And I'll sum up at the very end. So the Danish pension system consists of 3 pillars, like in most places. I'd say that the important characteristics here is that it's all defined contribution and it's all funded. And part of the pillar 3 schemes are provided by banks and not by insurance companies or pension funds. I'd also say that it's all regulated under Solvency II. There are no IOP schemes. And in the tax laws, there's a clear segregation between what are called pension savings and other sort of savings, pitching on one of the remarks from Jan, that pension savings, according to the Danish tax regime, is a saving where you have a tax deductions on the contributions and the benefits are taxable income. So it's quite clear from the beginning what does pension means in my country, which is not always the case, and you need to think about how to define the scope of the savings going into the system. Moreover, approximately 95% of all employees have been covered by a Pillar 2 scheme since the early 90s. And the Danish labor market is quite flexible and people change jobs ever so often. It's quite normal to change job every, say, 3rd year. And you have a new defined contribution scheme with a new employer or a new labor union. So many people have 3 or 5 or 8 different pension schemes if they don't use the opportunity to gather them and keep them together. And this really creates a need to create an overview and to create some possibility of advising individuals to gather and collect different schemes into larger pockets to save costs. So this is sort of the frame of the system and the savings environment, so to speak. So really the first challenge here is to consider what kind of products do you need to show, and is this only pension savings, or does it also cover risk products, disability covers, death covers, critical illness? And if you go down that path, where does it stop? Accident insurance, health covers, whatever. And on the savings side, you need to decide whether you decide the scope based on products, based on who's providing the products, or the tax treatment. And in my country, the tax treatment, I mean, Denmark is part of the Nordics, taxes are high. So tax is always important, and I guess the tax treatment has been sort of the most convenient way of framing and scoping the focus of a pension tracker system. So the first version of the Danish pension tracker system was created back in more than 20 years ago, in 1999. And ATP, a nationwide provider of a mandatory supplementary pension scheme. It's a supplementary to the state pension. Everybody has it, all employees has it, but benefits are small, and you need to add more savings if you want to live a decent life as a pensioner. They took lead because they had all Danes essentially in their client base. And they started small, they started simple, and they were not in alignment with the industry. But it was launched within a year, in December 1999, with a few pension funds run by labor unions joining together with ATP, and only one commercial pension company. No banks were in, and the information available was in a sort of insurance aspect, focusing only on forecast and retirement benefits, disability covers and death covers. And in Denmark, at that time, we had a common rule, common set of assumptions to use in order to provide forecasts. So the industry had an agreement on how to present future expected yields, how to account for cost, and how to account for inflation. And the common rule and calculation assumptions were aiming at showing future values, but discounted back to purchasing power as of today. So, I mean, these rules were there, they were established. So in terms of how to calculate, there was common rules in place. The first conclusion after a couple of years is really not good enough. It was very hard to get more pension suppliers to join the system. There was an increasing political demand and impatience with the industry that actually this was aiming at helping Danes getting this overview of their pension savings. And if only a few providers are in, and it doesn't show everything, it doesn't work. And facing the threat of legislation, the industry started working slowly on how to create an initiative on a voluntary basis in order for the industry to remain in the front seat and being able to decide the best possible way of building a pension tracker system, rather than having legislation, having politicians or the FSA to decide and define how to design a system. And I guess that the most important struggle here was the fundamental difference in perspective between banks and insurance companies. And a lot of the Pillar 3 pension savings products were provided by banks. So banks had a significant role in the total amount of pension savings in Denmark. And banks are focusing on current values. What is the asset value today? How to advise on investments, on risk versus return. And at that time, pension companies were providing mostly with profit, guaranteed defined contribution schemes, and the asset, the current value, didn't have any importance in such a world. So pension companies, life insurance companies were only looking at, future expected benefit. And I remember that participating in some of the discussions, I said, well, I mean, go down in the street, ask people, what do you want to know about your pension savings, if you want to know anything at all, that is? And the answer came quite clear back. I want to know how much I've saved, and I want to know how much I get out of it when I retire. So actually both set of informations were requested from the very beginning. So this led to sort of the version 2 of the system. This is where I personally was involved, as the 3 leading banking groups, 2 of them had life insurance subsidiaries, sat together and said, well, this existing pension info system doesn't work. It doesn't provide any information of the investment size as of today. We want to do something else. And this group of participants started to design a new version and actually published. Here we are, we will do something else. We will show current values. We will have a facility, we'll be able to facilitate an access for an individual to send the overview to their advisor in a bank or in a life insurance company. And we want to be able to have both a 1-person and a 2-person view on financial planning for couples. The last point didn't come in the first round, but came in later. And they were actually willing to start up a second pensionsinfo in Denmark, when finally the group sat together and decided that this wouldn't work. None of them would have success unless it was one system nationwide with all suppliers of, or all providers of pension savings products and pension and risk products sitting together in one organization. Because the purpose was, and the purpose is, to provide a full overview of the future pension. And the second purpose was to be able to send the information to somebody for counseling. And it requires only one solution. So really the second challenge here is how to present very different products in a comparable way. Because if I have a guaranteed pension system somewhere, and this is reflecting on one of the questions already sent on the difference between your very volatile, completely equity-based kind of savings and a very stable defined contribution with guarantees kind of savings. How do you project and make comparable projections on that? And at this time, all saving schemes were projected with the same set of assumptions, independent on the risk profile. That was a huge simplification, but at least it means that you're comparing future values from very different products, and no matter how much you will write on a page that these cannot be added together, these are not comparable. People will add the figures together and they will look at them as a sum of different solutions. So really you need to ask yourself all these questions. First of all, what are you going to show? Is it the current asset values or surrender values of today? Some products, especially if it's defined benefit, they might not even have a current value that makes any sort of sense. What about future expected benefits? How do you set up rules and assumptions to do the forecast? How do you compare? What about risk, different risk profiles? What about purchasing power? Should you use future values or discount back to purchasing power? How do you represent lump sums versus term insurance versus lifelong life annuities? How do you present it? How do you show it? How do you make people understand the difference? How do you decide on the retirement age? It's changing in many places in Europe as we're living, fortunately, living longer and longer. And you can ask many other questions. On the risk cover side, again, you need to, well, do you want to show risk covers at all? What about the coverage period? How do you represent that? What about the payout profile, lump sums versus term insurance versus annuities? On disability, is it an ongoing payment or is it just a one-off sum? What about disability criteria? It might change. There's a public criteria. There's some in the private markets in corporate pension schemes that differs from that. Do you want to show that? Do you want to show health covers? And many other questions. And all that you need to agree upon in order to even to start an initiative. If I just touch about on Pensions Info as an organization, it was established in cooperation between the industry organization of banks and insurance companies, two different organizations. It has outsourced all activities with the industry organization for life insurance and pensions, insurance and pensions, I should say. It has 85 pension providers as members. It's completely funded by the players in the market. And it is sort of built up in a democratic way with 100,000 votes, and it follows the payments. So if you're a large player and you have a lot of customers, you pay more, you have more votes. And the board of directors contains 11 elected members from the industry and 3 observers from relevant ministries. And as I said, no employees, and it's an independent organization. It's run without regulation and on a voluntary basis of the pension providers. And they have managed to get everyone in. It took some years. I think the restart was in 2007, if I remember correctly. And it wasn't until 2012, I think, or 2014, that all member banks and insurance companies were participating, delivering data into the system. So the key elements, and again, some of it is touching upon the challenges that Jan mentioned. It's based on own access only. So when I access a system, data is collected for the purpose of showing me, and they're not saved anywhere. They're not stored anywhere. There's no data warehouse with information. So it's an online solution, online real-time gathering information upon request. It needs to be kept simple. And you may provide layered information, but there needs to be a very, very simple overview in order not to lose people at the very first glance. Information needs to be standardized, and the definition of data, that was really, as Jan mentioned, it is assumed to be, that was the technical part. What is the data set that the providers should send in order to qualify for the system? The system also enables individuals to create a PDF report or to send in a digital way the information gathered to their pension suppliers. So if I have a life insurance agreement with 1 or 2 different life insurance companies, and I have my bank, and I have a Pillar 3 pensions agreement in a bank, I can essentially send my information to all my suppliers, or a selected one as I choose. And that can be done in a digital way in order for the bank or insurance company to grab the data and put it into their counseling system in a reasonable way, and they can do their financial advice on me and my spouse as I choose to, if both of us send the information to the provider. The on-site doesn't really have any recommendations. It's neutral. It's just showing the information. And it can be accessed on a desktop, on tablets, and on smartphones. So essentially, the system works by me accessing the system through my bank, through my pension, life insurance company or pension fund, or directly on pensionsinfo.dk. And when I push the button and I've logged in with my digital ID, it starts collecting information. Actually, it sends a request to all the 85 pension providers in the country to ask them whether they have me in their customer base. And they start collecting information, and I will be shown the information of those who answered. This is what it looks like. The English version is still under development. So I've translated. This is the overview tab that I get into, where I can see the current value of my assets. This is an example, it's not my data, by the way. But anyway, the current savings, the value, current value, and here it shows how much I will be paid when I retire by the age of, it says 67, which is sort of the standard retirement age in Denmark, lump sum, and over a period of time. It doesn't say whether it's lifelong or whether it's 10 or 15 years. It's just over a period of time. It has a tab saying pension, where you can dig further into the savings. It has a tab saying sickness and death, where the risk covers are shown. It has a tab with your schemes, where I can get more details on the individual agreements I have delivered by the suppliers. I can get the report, and if I punch on that one, I can send it to my advisor. And of course, yeah, I was there. That's it. That's sort of the first view that you're seeing. I think compared to what Jan showed, this may be even a version 2 where, I mean, this is the, I should say, this is a PC version. It's not the cell phone version. If I punch on the pension tab, I have a graphical overview of my expected benefit payments. It includes here the state pension in the bottom. I have a scroller or ruler here. I can change the retirement age anywhere between 60 and 70. And I can see more details where what is a lump sum, what is paid out over a period of time. We have usually it's a term insurance of 10 years and then the lifelong annuities. And the payout patterns are defined by the tax rules. It can only be either a lump sum, a term insurance over somewhere between 10 and 25 years, or lifelong life annuity. And you can see it in graphics and in figures, both of them. And here is the sickness and death covers, the death cover, lump sum, and as an annuity over a period of time. The disability, sorry, that was not the purpose. The disability cover and critical illness. And if I have a health insurance, it just says that you have a health insurance, and it doesn't provide any more information. I need to go into the second layer in order to see what's in there. The next things coming up soon in the system. So it's still under development, and it's still, I mean, there's, whenever you introduce such a thing, demands and requirements increase. And all the time you need to decide what to bring into the system, how to make sure that it's still simple, how to make sure that it gives an overview and it doesn't, and the customers, the individuals, do not get lost in details. But anyway, there is an English version under development, accepting that many people in this country do not speak Danish, although they work here for a number of years. There's still improvements on the admin system, where the providers providing information into the system can get statistics on more detailed use of the system. The website is also under development to make sure that people with disabilities have easier access to it. And it should facilitate an easier access to anonymous production data for testing for different providers. And further, we see demands from state organizations and from individuals and from advisors of additional information on cost, fees, and on the return and the risk profile. And here's really a tricky question on whether to relax on the very simple calculation assumption, where you use the same assumptions on future investment yield independent on the risk profile. Should you show, just a best estimate, a good weather and a bad weather scenario, or how would you illustrate volatility? That is still for discussion. The industry is struggling with that, and the industry is now producing figures on both a best estimate, a central estimate, and a good and a bad scenario in order to show the confidence intervals. It hasn't been built into this system, but it's up for consideration. Another interesting initiative here is a way for the individual to initiate a transaction. If I have been employed only a few months in different places and have small saving pots lying here and there, should I, through this system, be able to ask for a transfer into my current pension scheme in order to gather things together and pool things together? Sorry. And should it be possible to do more detailed calculations on what is the impact if I retire later than the official retirement age? And there's still a backlog on some of the questions that could be interesting. If I have a lifelong life annuity that is going to be paid out, and the actual amount to be paid out is expected to be constant, how do I show that the purchasing value is actually declining over time? Currently, the system is built in a way where you calculate the purchasing value of the first year, and you just reuse that as a constant. But essentially, depending on how the scheme is constructed, there could be a price regulation, inflation kind of assumption built into the system to make sure that the annual payments will increase with the expected inflation, or it could be designed in a way where you pay out as much as possible on a life insurance in the first year. And of course, it's not allowed to be declining on expectation, but if it's constant, if the expected payments are constant over a period of time, the inflation indexed value is actually declining. How do you show that? How do you facilitate for that kind of information? It's a very good question, and it's one of the questions that can be indefinitely complicated to solve. And it's important to make sure that the presentation doesn't becomes blurred to ordinary individuals who are not very interested in retirement in the first place. So my advice is really, it's not easy. Get started, cooperate across the industry of the different providers. Be flexible and pragmatic. I'd say that the worst enemy of a good solution is a perfect solution. It's not going to be perfect. And keep it simple, start simple, and you can add on information later on when you get used to it, when you see the use of it, when you get experience. Build it cheaply, small organization. If possible, make the decisions within the industry, avoid legislation on this. It's not going to be better by legislation. And the industry support is essential, otherwise you won't get anywhere. And actuaries can play a role in this. I mean, just defining the scope of products, defining the figures to be shown, the data feed required, quality of data. Jan touched upon those as well. All the nitty-gritty parts. We had loads of meetings when designing the data feed. And as I said, it's not supposed to be 100% academically correct. I mean, forecast over 10, 15, 20 years are uncertain anyway. So don't get upset by academics. Try to make sure that it's true and fair, but not necessarily 100% correct. I have, if time allows, I have just a few slides on the use of the system, and these are total numbers, but the population of Denmark is 5.8 million people. And this shows that actually we have more than 4 million logins every year into the system. So it is widely used. It's also clear from this graph that when the banks came in and Pillar 3 type of savings came into the system, interest increased dramatically. We had a change in the pension regulation in 2012. It showed that there was an additional focus there. And we see that banks and life insurance companies, when they are advising people, both before retirement, but definitely also at retirement, what do you have? How can we plan the payout in a tax efficient way that supports the lifestyle you want to have as well as possible? So it's very much used also at retirement to schedule and to plan how to bring the benefit payments of the different agreements into play in a good way. But this shows the number of, or the proportion of people using the system based on different age groups. And it's quite clear that to me, it was a surprise that so many people in their 30s are actually using the system. And as Jan may have suggested, it's actually when you apply for a mortgage loan, it's part of the total valuation of the health of your financial situation. If you have a retirement scheme, if you're saving money for your retirement. I mean, if I'm to give a 30 years mortgage loan, it is interesting to see if you are on track on your retirement savings as well. And this shows that we had more than 4 million logins, but 1.5 million unique logins. That's actually 25% of the population. I think it's a lot in 1 year. And the ways of accessing the system, we see that the direct login, that the pensions info as a brand becomes more and more widely known, and it's taking up a larger and larger proportion of the logins. Whereas in the very beginning, it was primarily through the web bank that people logged in. So it really changed from the beginning to now, and the brand of Pensionsinfo has become quite strong. I think I'm on time, 1 minute left, I think, but the Q&A,
Yeah.
I think we'll take it afterwards. So we will hear Ishar first, is that correct?
Christopher, we can take a few of questions now because
Yeah,
it is just on
no
the
problem.
point. Thank you for interesting presentation. It was really useful, and I think some of questions were answered during your presentation. But just in case, I will read. I will summarize the first two. Samuel asked how to deal with a risk versus a return, especially when we have variable payouts like unit linked or a defined contribution, and how to assess the future cost of living, how to assess purchasing power movement on the with regard to inflation changes, how to compensate inflation, and as a result, this affect the real well-being, wealth of the pensioners. So this is
Yeah,
the first question.
I think,
Do you
Samuel,
have something to add?
not very much. I mean, I know why Samuel is asking this question. It's because it is not solved in this. I mean, we see that the industry is providing on a product level, on their own products, these three scenarios in order to introduce a span, a confidence interval of the future benefits, depending on different assumptions. Whereas Pensionsinfo here only has the central figure, the best estimate figure. And it doesn't really account for different risk profiles in a very good manner. I think I mean, definitely the expected future return can be done in a more refined way, taking into account that if you invest very aggressively, you may have a higher return. But if you show that higher return and you allow for showing a higher return on a more risky investment book, you somehow should also show the high risk. And I think it would be dangerous, that's a personal point of view, that to show individuals that if I just take a higher risk, I will get a higher benefit when I retire. Or even worse, I can save some of the contributions today because I can catch up by taking a higher risk in my risk profile. So I think it's a very tricky question, and if when in a system like this, when you add different saving types together to try to accommodate for a risk perspective as well, I think it's going to be very, very challenging. And I don't think you can do it on the aggregate level. You may be able to do it on a single saving scheme level. And whether that is to be shown in Pensionsinfo as well as it is shown in on the website of the providers.
Yeah, you mentioned that
it's second layer, I'd say. It's second layer information. It should be further down.
Yeah, actually, Samuel make some amendments with regard to consumers should make their own decision. They should be responsible for choosing appropriate risk profile, and yeah, it seems that Pensionsinfo is not in position to take to give them advices. It's just to present best estimate expectations. So and the second question that I will allow myself to put on this place in the discussion is the question of Peter Hulotnak from Slovakia. Peter mentioned that in Slovakia only 1% of people fully use orange envelope solution, which is Slovakian PTS platform, and ask either both of you with Jan whether there is appropriate KPIs which to measure successful of the particular pension tracking system. Is there any advices or parameters that could be used? Yeah. But we saw in your presentation that even in Denmark, during the first 10 years, the ratio of users was less than 10%. So probably the first year's 1% is not so disappointing ratio.
I agree, and I think that it's important to say that where we really see the use of the system picking up was more or less at the same time where the implementation of the functionality that you could send your report to your financial advisor. I mean, it cannot be sent to a broker because brokers are not members of the system. So it can only be sent to providers, but it really means that a bank use this tool whenever they do financial planning to an individual or family. It's a mandatory part of the information the bank requests if you ask for a 360-degree financial advice, or when you apply for a loan if you want to buy a house, or even if you apply for a loan to buy a car. They may ask to get certain information. They want to know something about your salary and your income and your expenses and your pension savings. So it's an integral part of financial advice, and it's used by the financial advisors everywhere. And this is probably generating a lot of the traffic. So it's not because, individuals are sitting Friday evening after dinner thinking, gee, I want to know how much, pension savings I got. It's not going to happen, and probably shouldn't. But it's an integral part of financial planning. And this is where the value comes in.
Thank you very much, Christopher.
Thanks.
I think this is very interesting, and I think a lot of people in different countries they see this issue the same as you do, because that's more a general issue within at consumers. And what I get from your presentation is that it's very nice to see that we could learn from each other. For example, Denmark has some outstanding things that you've shown us where other countries can learn from. You're challenging, for example, big questions around parameters to be used and how to show risk and return. Where in other countries, for example, in the Netherlands, we have tried to solve this issue a bit. So interaction between countries is very useful to make sure we can solve these problems. But for now, I would like to go to the last presenter, which is Richard Deville from France. And I think technically something has to be used. So the presentation of Christopher has to be off the screen, and then the presentation from Richard will be on screen. And I will give the floor to Richard.
Richard, please unmute yourself.
Yes, Caroline, second slide, please. Okay, well, in fact, I really liked very much a presentation of Jan, and because it's very interesting to all the issues he has pulled out that we have faced in France. I'll just make one point. There is already a PTS system in France that exists, which is like a bit like Pensions Info, created in 2003. The big difference is that it doesn't cover pre-funded or capitalization plans, because in France they represent, in fact, it's not 96% of paid pensions that the pay-as-you-go pension provides 98%. I got the last figures yesterday on the 220 data, and that's it. So this is why the French info system for retraite doesn't cover pre-funded schemes. Now, second slide, please. Now, the role of the info retraite system has been reinforced through the pension law since January, and has been renamed Union Retraite. Okay, all the mandatory pensions received by members of Union Retraite and fund info retraite with a contribution function. It's a levy of function of the number of individual covered. So it's the same story as we can see in Netherlands and in Denmark. The document that shows the architecture can't be put on the slide, but it will be put on the AAE website. Next slide, please. Okay, what you must understand is that it's a live access. The Info Retraite is a live access system. Okay, so the big problem of that is the quality of the data. I would like to come back on what Jan Bertsen said on the back end, which is a very important issue. When you do it on a practical basis and you help people to assess their retirement, or you want to do it yourself, if the provider of pensions info says, oh, statistically speaking, around the whole population, we have got a very small number of errors, it's totally irrelevant if you speak to a fellow at his own pension, at his own level. And what I've seen according to many years, because I've been working for quite a long years as an employee benefit actuary and helping people to set up their pensions and this and that, is that if something is wrong at your own level, you're much more effective than if somebody says, okay, only 1% or 2% of the data are incorrect. And I really think that the problem is the quality of data. Moreover, many, many years ago, lots of that pension data were on paper and not in IT system. The IT system were very old. You've got a lot of mergers of providers, and data have been lost and this and that. And the people that set up info system, and one comment, it's been created by Marie-Thérèse Lens, that was the former chair president of Nations des Actuaires. She was one of the rare actuaries working in pay-as-you-go pension system. And she was very pushed like hell to set up Info Retraite many years ago. And I think Jeroen remembers, we see one of the directors many years ago on a meeting to explain Info Retraite. This is why, in parallel to Info Retraite, the people saw that there was a huge issue about the quality of data, and they decided in 2010 to build a single repository containing details of the careers of the entire French population. It's a very ambitious task. I don't know if we'll achieve it. Next slide, please. It's enormous. It's absolutely enormous, and it will contain all very detailed information. And the idea, in fact, is to build up a data warehouse with everybody, the retirees, the future retirees, and this and that. As we'll see later on, there is governance and data system, protection data system issues. But the thing is to have a special team that when you put it in the repository, you check that the data that you put in are good, and you just don't collect what is in the system information provided by various pension providers. So it's going to be good if it succeeds, but I think it's very ambitious. Next slide. Okay, as you see, in June 2021, RGCU had already recorded 20 million insured, because as explained, I think in the Danish system, you can have many people can have 7 different pensions come according to their work career and their change of status, civil servant, self-employed, employee, this and that. And now they are going to go for another migration, and the final migration is planned for the end of 2025. And the RGCU is led by the CNAV, which is the Social Security regime, all age regime for employees. It's the one that is the biggest in terms of numbers of employees in the system. It's what I mean, the people that run the CNAV is the biggest organization. So they've got the biggest means in computing, and they cover everybody regardless of the situations in France. So they've got the broader, it's the first pillar, they've got a broader view of everything. And they have been put in task of this repository system. Yes, I will answer the questions after. Next slide, please. Okay, the threats and opportunities: data protection, compliance with the EU data general protection, security of the PTS, Big Brother, better monitoring of the mandatory regime, social studies, and governance will be a hot topic. To answer to the question that was just asked to me, the projections are not at all stochastic. It's projection that, let's say, let's say that I asked today, the estimation, the forecast of my retirement. Let's say that I'm 5 years from the my retirement date, that I've different retirement date I've choose. In fact, they make the assumption either that you to keep on the same level of salary, or you choose to have an increase in your salary or reduce in your salary. It's you to decide according to what you know of your life and what your career is going to be in the next 5 years. If you just stay as if, or if you say you will be increased, or if for various reasons you will have got less problem on employment, or obliged to change job because you're getting a senior and you will have less salary and less money. What I would like to say as a conclusion, I think I've been quite short, is that really the back-end system is the most important for me. The last thing I would like to say, I don't know if it's the same in the other countries, is that the numerization of the economy and of the services and this and that is very important. The issue about that, it's that you don't have access to people. I've been seeing that on the course of the last 15 years, helping people for pension. 15 years ago, when you had an issue, you could go to the provider, the last provider, and say, I don't understand with your papers, and you could discuss. After it started to be on a platform, but on the platform, you still could have individuals. Now, everything is internet. When you never can reach any human being, everybody shoots you back to the website, and you just can't get your things done. When it's getting a bit complicated, so you've got people on platform that say, oh, hello, what's your name? They ask you your name, your birth rate, blah, 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 to get information. But you can see that these people have got no knowledge, and they always shoot you back either to the second level of expertise that probably doesn't come to see you, or you can't get anybody. And I think that is very, very frustrating, at least in France. I'm sure it's the same in other countries, that you can't have any more human being. You don't get services with the numerization. It's the same story with the providers of mobile phones or internet. But this numerization that suppress responsibility of the pension provider towards the individual, I think for me is a big issue with the quality of the data. Thank you, everybody. Okay, you're right.
Yes, thank you very much,
I'm ready
Richard.
for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard. One of the questions that I at least have on the situation in France that you made clear in your presentation is what are you are trying to resolve the data issues within the French system, but are there also actuaries involved in dealing with these issues?
Now, there are very few actuaries, if none, working in the social security and the ARCO-AGIRC. Some of them work in the pension providers, but they work to sell the supplementary pre-funded funds that represent presently only 2.1% of the total pensions paid in France, which are 334 billion. The actuaries are not very involved, but they are getting more and more involved as long as the supplementary pre-funded schemes take more and more place. But it's coming from 2%. There is room for progress. So it's another world. 88%, 98% of pensions are mandatory on a pay-as-you-go. So the capitalization market is very small in France yet.
Yeah.
But we don't get the same issues of, as Christopher explained, of the projection and the optimistic, pessimistic, central scenarios about the future of the assets and financial market. We don't get this problem yet in the French pension system, PTS. It's non-relevant.
And that is why I invite everyone to ask questions about Richard's presentation and the other presentation as well. But just to get into your remark, Richard, so there is no such thing as risk surrounding the pension or the pension benefit that's going to be paid out in the French system. So everyone thinks that the pension that is being paid out by Social Security is well, sure, is with no risks surrounded?
But the thing is that it's a good question. In fact, the risk is the risk of the French financial system or the French economy, because first pillar plus Agir Carco, okay, it's a point system. So you pay so much contributions and you get so many points, and the points have got a value, and it's decided on a national level across all branches. So it's something, it's a gamble on the French economy and the French unemployment level, because if you got unemployment, you got no contribution. So it's not a gamble on a company, it's a gamble on a nation. That doesn't mean it's safer, huh? It means it's different.
Yeah, but it's another risk than, for example, investment risk or inflation risk or whatever. Yeah.
And what I would like to say to add is, when I was in a Danish presentation a couple of years ago with somebody representing the supervisor, the level of financial literacy in Denmark stunned me. The guy was speaking about swaps and all kind of hedge fund products and this and that. This is something insinkable from a French supervisor, which I say would be much more classical. So it's another, we are not used to we're not people from the northern part of Europe that are much more in the capitalist system. We're in the middle between Latin and South system and northern part of Europe. So we are not at all, the French people are very non-financial literate.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. I might have a question for Christopher. I hope he's still in the room. Christopher, we touched upon the issue of having the information sent towards advisors. Does Denmark face any GDPR issues surrounding spreading this information towards advisors? How is that being dealt with within the Danish system?
Being dealt with quite simply, actually, because the only way to send the information to an advisor is by action of the individual. So if I send my information to my advisor, you must assume that I'm, accepting the fact that the advisor will receive the information, and the information received has to be treated exactly the same way as if I came in the door with a bunch of PDF, a physical PDF file that is only to be stored for the advisory session, and it can only be kept, I think, for 1 month and has to be deleted again. So it's exactly the same rule that applies as if I came in the door with a hard copy. And so nothing changed. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, and I can imagine this, of course, but I'm just asking this question because of the fact that, for example, if you want to give the data to an advisor, then I could imagine that you don't want to have all different kinds of systems to deliver information to all kinds of different advisors. So is there some kind of a uniform standard to make sure that the information is dealt with in the same way in the direction of every advisor?
I think, the data transfer from each provider into the web portal and the transfer of information from the web portal to the chosen advisor is more or less working the same way and with the same data security. Of course, it can be broken somehow, it can be hacked, but essentially data is not stored in any systems by Pensions Info. It's in a browser and that's it, in the cloud somewhere. And it's sent and it's received by the financial institution who's supposed to receive it. And they have, their measures on how to receive data from clients. Yeah,
thank you. What I was wondering as well is you talked about those common rules that have to be set in order to make the prognosis of the different amounts that you want to project for the beneficiaries. But who sets those rules within Denmark?
They are set in common in a cooperation between the industry organization for insurance and pensions on one side and the banks on the other side. And of course, their assumptions have been challenged in a number of ways, especially in recent years, when you can challenge their assumptions on interest rates and the risk-free rates of state government bonds. I mean, we've had negative interest rates, for Christ's sake. You cannot put that into the system, especially not for a long period of time. And the discussions of, well, if you assume that the interest rate is, say, 1% the first 5 years and 2.5% from there, well, what happens when you change the interest rate from a 1% level to 2.5%? What happens to the price of a bond? And you know, usually the bond price would drop when interest rate shifts, and that hasn't been incorporated into the system. So you can always challenge. As I say, a good solution has the worst enemy of a good solution is a perfect solution. But you need to have some sort of robust, common ways of dealing with the future assumed investment return.
Yeah, yeah. And then my last question towards at least then Tatjana can close the meeting. But in this setting those common rules, of course, me as an actuary, are actuaries involved in these setting the rules as well?
Well, not from the banking side, at least, but usually the persons working on the insurance side and working with the industry organization, there will be actuaries among them, I'd say, but not necessarily. It's not an actuarial decision per se. Yeah,
yeah. Thank you very much. Thank
may
you.
May I say something?
Yeah, of course.
I've got the impression, you know, that now we are getting from a system that was employers, salaried, you had HR people, you had actuaries helping for the pension with insurers, and now more and more we are going for DC systems with third level, and everything is going to be just financial banking products. And history has shown us that there has been a lot of mis-selling in this thing. I don't see why it should change. So I'm a bit cautious about that. And that would be my last remark.
Okay. Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you very much, Christopher, as well. Tatjana, would you like to make a final remark for this webinar?
Yeah, thank you, Jeroen. I'd just like to thanks a lot to our presenters. Thanks, Jan, Richard, and Christopher. I believe that a lot of extremely useful information was shared on the today webinar, and it seems that soon we will be able to cover all 7 existing PTS. Colleagues from pension committee and the social security committee are aware that we considered and discussed 3 other pension systems in during our meeting at the end of September last year. So we got familiar with some features of Netherlands, PTC, Sweden, and Slovakia. So it seems that next time we will have to discuss 2 more. And after that, to make kind of comparison with lessons learned or best features that could be taken for each of this existing system. Which we are confident that actuarial role should have place in development of PTS, and also we believe that such type of services help customers to make well-informed decision. So this is the direction that we should work continuously and look forward for improvement. As Christopher and probably Jan said, we should start for small thing, but have a very, very big dreams ahead of us. So thank you very much for your participation today, and keep safety and continue networking on this topic.
Yes, thank you
Thank
very
you,
much,
Jeroen, for
Jan.
your support.
I can tell you, Jan, good job, and I can tell you PTS is sensible to everybody.
Yeah, sure.
Everybody neighbor knows I'm an actuary, and they grab me on the pension French system. What's about my pension? They don't give a damn about satellites, they give a damn about their own pensions.
Sure, all of us are the next customers of these services.
Yeah,
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
rest
Good
of
luck
the
with your
day.
profession. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you.